Welcome back. This is Catalina with Gran Via, and I wanted to go ahead and talk about literacy and the stages of literacy. This is a video that I've been mentally preparing for some time, and so I do plan on teaching it in parts. You will get access to the whole video online, obviously, at my YouTube channel, but I will try to be breaking it down into parts so that people can look at it and have references in smaller pieces. I'm going to try to do as comprehensive of a job as possible. But there's a lot. There's a lot of like wiggling pieces. And so part of it too is like I have it planned out in my head. I have it written in a little outline, but you know what? When it comes to the moment of actually doing it, your brain actually begins to source all of this prior knowledge that in the moment, you start having recollection through muscle memory of all those things that you did before. So it could actually be much bigger than what I'm planning on. So anyway, we're hoping to kind of keep it under an hour. Let's see if that's possible. And I'm not really going to hold myself down to any limit because when it comes to literacy, literacy is by far the most empowering change-making agent in the life of an individual in terms of their ability to participate and have, monetary access to success and all of the opportunities out there. So literacy is a big deal. My intention is to try to be concise, but more important than that, my real intention underneath that is to be effective. I am recovering from a nasty cold, and so there's that too. Okay, thanks for your patience. So there are so many different ways that that the field breaks down literacy. And there is, there are charts that we use to break down levels of literacy. We also have the stages of literacy, which are more segmented, like maybe 4, 5, 6 blocks of literacy progression. But the field people, I guess, that are like master reading teachers or have been in the field of reading some time, they understand the levels of reading and the levels of literacy. So there's a really great resource online, and I'm surprised I'm jumping into it this soon, but that's okay because it's really good. And also it's great for delineating the levels of literacy, right? So I like to start with reading A to Z, because reading A to Z is it's not necessarily a free resource, but it is free for some time. They give you like a 14-day trial. And really that's enough for a lot of people to get, a lot of the essential resources that they need. So I want to share this with you. And so reading A to Z breaks it down, breaks reading levels down into the alphabet. And so many people break it down in different ways. As you can see, there's like Lexile levels, which is pretty much the traditional field standard. I never really, honestly, my school districts did not really use Lexile levels, but it seemed like a lot of the veteran teachers when I was first coming in used Lexile levels a lot. So they referenced Lexile levels. I was taught through DRA at Fountas and Pinnell. And to be fair, the reading A to Z. And that's only because the Fountas and Pinnell uses the same scale as reading A to Z. And let me just I said that backwards. Reading at ISE uses pretty much the same scale as Fountas and Pinnell. So, because Fountas and Pinnell is another field standard. They've been in the field of literacy for, since I first came in 2001, they had already been in decades before me. So they're like a field standard when it comes to determining levels of literacy. And so they start with, and I'm going to make reference to the reading and ISE levels. They start with a AA, which is like a pre-K level, moving into an A, which is like a K level, a kinder level, right? And then B, C, D, and you work all your way down. Now, the ages I think are a little off because and I say that because of my experience, right, over 20 years teaching literacy in the classroom with students at all grade levels, including high school. Z, which is like 5-star, goal here, Z usually is hit sometime near middle school and high school. So I don't know if 11 years old is really reasonable for a Z, but I can accept it. There's always standards and, that's fine. Reading at a Z has, but to me, an 11-year-old does not read with the same mastery, right? That may be a middle school or high school or even college level reader reads, but that's fine. I mean, those are just nuances. You're, what is it they say, splitting hairs at that point? Not a big deal. We're not going to die on those rocks. And there's so much debate in the reading field about little details like that. And people end up slashing and burning entire programs because they can't come to an agreement or even a compromise on the way something is said. So the science of teaching reading is very debated and people have very hot, heated arguments around it. So I really choose to opt out of those things and just kind of let things be as such because I'm about getting non-readers to become readers. And when I say readers, I mean lovers, aficionados, lovers of reading. Lifelong love of reading is the goal for me. That to me means you're a reader, not simply just a decoder that you can always say, not that you can read the menu at McDonald's. That to me is not reading. Reading to me is you have a genre or two or three that you love. You are empowered. You know how to source literacy to get the answers that you need for self-development and for, self-development and self-realization, I think is the bottom goal here. Then we will go into the stages of writing because they kind of mimic each other. We'll go into that later on. And the stages of writing, my goal is not for them to be able to write their name or even sign their name, and I know that there's a lot of debate around cursive writing. I do feel like cursive writing, though some people may say it's outdated or archaic, who doesn't want to have a signature? If you deny a child access to cursive writing, there's no signature. And I'm like, okay, we could debate what, the value of a signature, but I want my child to have one. So while other people are debating about it, I'm going to be teaching my kids a signature. So that's that type of thing. I think that it is a human right. I don't think that we should be denying options to students. Let them decide whether or not they want to use a signature, but it's our job to empower them with the ability to have a signature. Because I remember my son who had vehemently, he didn't like that mom was a teacher. Mom wanted to teach him at home, all those things. And so he did not want to do all the little things that mom thought were a good idea to do. And cursive writing was one of those. And so he came to me in middle school and he was like, he felt bad about the fact that he did not know how to read cursive writing or write cursive writing. And so we had that conversation in secondary when he came to me because he felt like he had somehow missed out on something that could be viable. And I was like, absolutely yes, because you need to have a signature, son. And so we went through the cursive writing, we went through decoding cursive writing when it comes to like reading it. And then we also went through his signature, and he worked on that signature for some time. So yes, let the children decide whether or not they want to use a signature. If we deny them the opportunity to have a signature, then that to me is subtractive in nature. I'm here as an educator to empower my students, right? And I'm going to give them all the tools that one day they might decide they want to use. I'm not going to filter out tools for them and deny them the choice to be able to use those tools in the future. That is not the spirit and the intent of education. And education should be copious. It should be generous, right? Not limited. It shouldn't be something that we decide what you're going to learn. No. Just give them everything and let them decide what they're going to learn. I think that's fair. That's generally speaking, I know that's generally speaking what the adults did in my life. And I appreciate that because I didn't use everything, but it's there if I want to use it later. And that makes me feel empowered. I don't know how to diagram sentences, but by golly, I know what a prepositional phrase is. And when it came to learning Spanish as like recapturing my heritage language of Spanish, prepositional phrases came in. All the grammar that I learned through diagramming sentences in the 80s, all of that became handy when it was time for me to learn Spanish at the professional level in the 2000s. So anyway, reading A to Z provides like that structure that we need to have when we teach literacy. It helps give us an idea of where students are in their reading journey. Are they at a level A? Are they at a level B? Are they at a level L? Another thing that I want to tell you is, and this is interesting, for those of you that are watching the full video, you'll get an appreciation of this. The level A to L, like basically if you divide the alphabet in half, right? You get A to L and then M to Z. In the A to L stages, students are learning to read from stages A to L, right? And in stages M to Z, students are reading to learn. Totally different. So if you're reading at an M to Z, now you're reading to learn. You're no longer learning to read, you're reading to learn and acquire new information. And this is where I say, this is like the empowerment stage down here, because from M to Z, you are now choosing text that you like. You're able to read, decode, decipher, thick academic language. Obviously, we want to go as far away from M as possible and as close to Z as possible. And that takes time and that takes practice. A child can do that themselves if they love Harry Potter, right? If they love their books. It doesn't have to be Harry Potter. I'm just making a reference, a cultural reference. But it can be any series of book that they love, and they can go ahead and move themselves along several levels. But here's the problem in education. The problem, and this is not with education, it just occurs in education. The problem is in classrooms, many times students are in secondary and they're still reading at a level H, or they're reading at a level K, or they're even reading at a level L or D. Those students that are in high school are still learning to read. They're not reading to learn yet. And so those high school teachers find themselves in a predicament because they're passing out articles or they're reading from books that are written at the reading to learn stage, but their children in their classes or their students in their classes are still learning how to decode, blend, and segment words. And so that's really why I made this video to begin with, because we have a lot of students struggling with literacy, even in the upper grades. It is not the students' fault, and students should not be held, to blame for that. Because systemically, we've had a big pendulum go back and forth in the reading field, and this happens all the time in education, where they have gotten away from the best practices of reading instruction. And they have tried to maybe go too much into whole language, which is a philosophy of teaching where you teach like the word recognition by recall, then phonics where you teach students how to read sound by sound, letter by letter, blend and segment. So I learned through phonics. I actually was diagnosed with dyslexia as a child at a tiny little country private school that I went to. I was blessed to go to that private school, and I was blessed that they cared enough about me to do something about it. There must have been 10 teachers in that whole school, and 3 or 4 of them hovered around me at all times to make sure that I began to make sense of the language. And I'm talking 1982, 1980. I don't mind dating myself. I'm 46 years old, so it doesn't mean anything to me. I lost my 2 sisters in their 30s. For me to be in my 40s and approaching my 50s is the biggest blessing of a lifetime. I would never be ashamed of the time that God has given me on this planet to work and impact and transform and help support the lives of others, and especially the children. So when it comes to like dyslexia and things like that, I was taught to read through phonics because that's really the best solution when it comes to dyslexia, children with alternative, like special reading needs and literacy needs. I'm a big, huge proponent of phonics, okay? I do understand the role of sight words, and I am good with sight words. Sight words are basically the 2,000 most used words in the English language, and if, but, for, nor, it, he, she, they, those types of words, and so a lot of times in classes, they will teach the students to just look at those words and recall those words and just kind of memorize those words. I'm good with that. I mean, I personally was taught to sound them out, A-N-D, and, right? I was taught to sound them out, but I mean, I don't see any harm or folly in having students learn their sight words. The argument in them learning sight words is that it aids in their fluency. So they spend less time trying to segment and sound the word out. If they're reading a book, they can just say like the, cat, and dog, right? So it helps facilitate them moving right along. And I'm okay with the sight words. That's fine. But I am a fan, baseline fan. If I had to pick a team, I would pick Team Phonics 1,000 times over, because not only is it good for phonics, but it's also good for biliteracy. And this is ultimately also a multilingual education channel that does integrate gen ed, because we live together, right? When we are in schools and in education, we are not just multilingual, we are also gen ed. We have to learn gen ed math, science, social studies, reading, everything else. But then we have that twist, that multilingual twist on our work. So in that, I do believe that every child benefits, gen ed, multilingual, you name it, from having a phonics-based reading experience and literacy experience. It's also very transferable when it comes to learning a second or third language. It helps you decode the other languages, so you're able to decode and transfer those things maybe a little bit more easily than somebody that used more of a sight word entire whole language approach to literacy. Whole language works because you recall words that you recognize, but what happens when you see a word that you don't recognize written in another language? That's why I think phonics takes a has a clear advantage over whole language. That said, I'm still a proponent of sight words. I can really get behind that. I've seen them and I've taught them several years, perfectly fine. In fact, I would encourage that in terms of fluency. It's a good practice to teach sight words. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on sight words. I would definitely spend more time on phonics. Like in kinder, first and second, pre-K, I would say to a 90-10 percentage rate. If I had to put it in numbers, I'd say I'd spend about 10% of the time on sight words and 90% of the time on phonics. Because really it's about the student's ability to sound out, segment, blend words. Okay. I might need to go over all of those and explain those things soon. But anyway, we're going to start with the reading A to Z correlation chart. Reading A to Z is, again, like I said, you have a 14-day trial. And then you can see they have so many literacy supports for pretty much most of the things that I'm going to be presenting to you in the video. So I do appreciate the work that they do at Reading A to Z. I am not being paid for this plug. I feel like I owe it to them after so many years that I've used them, probably for over 10 to 15 years in the classroom. I've been using Reading A to Z. Many times I was using their free trials. So the least I could do is give them a positive plug here because they are absolutely fabulous. They have written books in different languages, English, Spanish, and French. So we'll take a look at their website here in a minute. Anyway, so this is the correlation chart, and this is how basically we break down reading. Okay. When I make reference to reading levels, I'm going to be anchored here in the Fountas and Pinnell reading A to Z lens. I have used DRA many years, but I find that the Fountas and Pinnell reading A to Z is a little bit more universal than the DRA reading recovery levels. So just so you'll know, reading and recovery, and I don't know, and I'm doing this also for the reading teachers. Reading recovery is a program that was, I understand it was federally mandated, and it was available when I first came into the field. So it was absolutely amazing because we had master reading teachers, and these were like, I mean, I hate to go into generations, but these, I guess they were like boomer generation. And because I remember them being seasoned, like either they were rehire in 2001, or they were about to retire. So like these women were in their 50s, maybe early 60s or mid 60s in 2001. Okay. These were master reading teachers. And whenever you had students, because we would do our reading level assessments, and I still am a big proponent of reading level assessments. I know that the field has gotten away from them and they've integrated other things, technology, they're also using like Amplify and M-Class here in Texas. But to me, there's nothing like a good solid reading assessment to determine where the students are. There's nothing like sitting down beside a student and listening to them read, annotating through anecdotal notes or formative notes or just little post-it notes, right? What you're hearing so you can identify areas of need. But reading and recovery basically was a program where these veteran teachers would come into your classroom and they'd say, hey, do you have any students that are reading below level? And we would say, yeah, and we have like 6 or 7 students out of 22 or 24 that are reading below level. And so they would say, okay, I'm going to take, and they would break them down into groups, right? Let's say that your reading level should have been an L for 2nd grade, and you have like 6 kids that are reading at an A or at a D, around there. So they would come into your class and they would pull, they'd say 2 groups. I'll take the A group and then I'll come back and I'll get the D group in a little bit. So they would come in, they would do all these beautiful reading interventions. And after 2 or 3 months of just taking them for a little bit and working with them and bringing them back to you, voila, the students would be reading at grade level. And so all of the tricks of the trade that they had, they would teach that to us in these after school reading trainings, which obviously meant that we had to stay past 4 o'clock. We would go rushing in there as soon as the students were picked up, and we would stay at least an hour, hour and a half with these reading recovery teachers who would spend time teaching us what we needed to do. And this would happen throughout the year, not every day, but it may happen, 2 or 3, 4 times a month. And you were good with it because, well, we were trained and we knew that we had to get training somewhere and somehow. So there is also, I believe, there has to be a willingness on the part of the educator to give up a certain amount of time to be able to receive the training that you need to be effective in the classroom. Because to me, showtime in education is 8 to 3:30, 7:45 to 3:30. When you have those students, that's showtime. That is not the time to be backstage trying to figure out how to do something. That's not the time to be planning to figure out how to do something. This is not the time to be making copies. Showtime is showtime. You're in the class doing the thing that you have already planned for in the past and that you've already gotten resources for in the past. So you have like a 45-minute planning period, right? Assuming that you get that planning period. And again, I lost a lot of planning periods to training, and I'm good with that. If it's good training, I'm good with that. And that's the administrator's discretion, right? Discretionary decision of whether or not they wanted to train us on something and pull us out of planning. And I know that there's like limitations based on that, but my point is there has to be a willingness on the part of the educator to sometimes be put out, right? To get an education, because when you're getting trained, you guys, that is continuing ed. You have to get training because you've got to get really good at your craft. And if you don't get training, how are you going to get good at your craft? You get trained is essential to you being good at your craft. Otherwise, you're just crafting, but you're not good at it. You're just doing it. And you're doing it and you're going through the motions aimlessly if you don't have proper training. So creating training, and this is why this company exists, right? Creating the proper training venues and accepting those trainings when they're offered to you is an ethical and, to me, a moral responsibility of the professional. I want to do a better job teaching my students how to read. Therefore, it's my responsibility to get the resources needed to be able to carry out that job, right? I don't want to be the worst reading teacher in the district. I want to be the best reading teacher in the district. So I'm going to find out what has worked in the past. I'm going to find out what's working now. I'm going to learn the science of teaching reading, and I'm going to figure out how to do the best possible job I can. And that's going to take hours outside of the school day, right? And every once in a while, that may dip into my planning period, hopefully not much, because you do need time to plan, but you also need time to learn how to do a better job, right? At reading or whatever it is that you're teaching, right? So, in talking about the stages of reading, that is it. This is essentially the reading A to Z levels of reading. We'll jump over to different interpretations of this. So the bilingual 164 is very similar to the ESL exam, but I'm looking at some of the state resources, and they have this one question, number 19. And if you just Google by BIL 164 TExES exam, TExES exam, you'll be able to access the sample questions that you'll find here. All right, so they use the stages that the the stages that they call out for stages of language acquisition, and that's perfectly fine, but they use the same stages. Generally speaking, they use the same stages for reading and writing. And so we have pre-production, production, emergence, fluency, and I think that's where they go. So there are different variations of this. You here see this as pre-production, which would be like in the language acquisition, this would be the silent stage, and then the production, right? Then emergence into the language, and then fluency. But you'll see these words come up over and over again, given different scenarios. This is one for the stages of reading that we use. Early, emergent, transitional, and fluent. This is an older model of what they pulled out for Fountas and Pinnell, which I told you was one of the Acme Brick standard field standards, right? Fountas and Pinnell. So they use emergent, early, transitional, and fluent. All right, great. These are what we call bands, and this is really, I love this piece here on the side. Remember the reading A to Z that we showed you a little bit earlier, right? The leveled readers, and it talks about the different grade levels where students might achieve these levels of literacy. And if you are wondering, how do we determine what reading level the students are on? Each one of those brands that I showed you earlier, Fountas and Pinnell, they have DRA, Reading A to Z, Lexile. Each one of those brands has a kit. And that kit is used, that it's full of like little handbooks and little what we call little readers. They call them leveled readers. And they have a student read at that level. And if it's, you're aiming for the instructional level, you want to figure out where's the student reading, or like just struggling just a little bit, like maybe 80% accuracy and 20%, developing. And that's a nice little instructional level. Or some people test at the independent level, meaning that the student is able to read independently with 85% accuracy at that reading level. So I would always test for instructional because I care where they're reading independently, but as a teacher, I'm always aiming for the next level of development, that zone of proximal development, that ZPD +1 by Vygotsky. I'm always aiming for that next level of development. So I would always aim for the instructional level when it came to determining which instructional level we would put them on for reading. But these right here, these little segments that are little triangles, these are called bands. And so the grade 1 reading level has a pretty wide band. They can have some students reading at a level B or a level I. And the second grade band, right, goes from H to M. And the third grade band goes from L to P. And fourth grade goes from O to T. And grade 5 goes from S to W. And yes, it does. I've had several W's. Grade 6 goes from V to Y, and then you have everyone else that is Z. So those are bands. Obviously, you will have the outlier students. You'll have, like, I always think about, my father used to always talk about the rule of 20, and the 20-80 rule, right? So you're always going to have 80% in that bell curve, and then 20 on the outline SARDs. So you have 10% that are really high, 10% that are really struggling, and 80% right there in the middle. So yes, you will have, let's say, look, grade 1, that's a huge spectrum. Some students are at a level I. That's like, that's pretty strong reading and decoding. It's not fluent yet. You're not fluent till you're at a KLM. More an L is the sweet spot for fluency, but an I is really far along. And think about it, we have some first graders at that point. That's great. But then we're going to have some first graders who are still learning how to sound out the word cat. So there's a wide range in literacy levels. Anyway, these are called bands. and you always want to stay within your band, and reading teachers should be aiming for the top of the band. And I would say the responsible thing, if at all possible, is pushing those kids into the next year's band. There's nothing wrong with a second grader that's reading at a level N. There's nothing wrong with a third grader that's reading at a level R. So I would always try to get those kids as far along as I can, because next year, I don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to have a teacher that resigns in the middle of the year? Are they going to have, I don't know, but I'm trying to get those kids as far pushed on as possible so that they can pick up there and move forward next year. I always worry about next year's teacher. I trust next year's teacher, but I don't know who they are. So I want to get my kids as far as I can along. And I'm going to tell you, with bilingual students, especially for supporting biliteracy in dual language classrooms and bilingual classrooms, we know that the research says that our students, when compared in English to other English speaking students, our students are about 6 years behind. So we don't have the luxury of making 1 year's growth, because let's say we have an English speaker, a general education speaker, they're making 1 year's growth. Well, if my students start at 6 years behind, and this English speaking kid on English tests is making 1 year's growth, then my students are going to be like always going to stay 6 years behind if they're making 1 year's growth. I can't make 1 year's growth. If I want my students to catch up to the general ed population on the English tests, then I need to be making 2 years growth, 2.5 years growth. As much as I can possibly do during that year that I have them, because I need them to catch up to general ed in English on the English assessment before they hit middle school. Now, that does not mean I'm not teaching Spanish literacy. I was actually one of the people that pushed Spanish literacy the hardest in my district. I took Spanish literacy all the way up into the end of 5th grade. We were reading chapter books in Spanish. We tested STAR tests in Spanish, which is something that a lot of people won't do out there in the field. But just because I'm pushing, like, maintaining and deepening and more depth and complexity on their Spanish language does not mean that I'm not developing their English. There's enough time for both of them. What do you mean there's enough time for both of them? As long as we can make time for small group, as long as we can make time for differentiated instruction, we can be developing both of them. Personally, and it was outside of the design, I get it. The design had us doing mostly English at the end, even though we should not have been. We'd be doing mostly Spanish. That's fine. So I would take my SLR time that was precious. And we would teach and read, like, whole group. We would have our big classroom discussions and all of those on developing, going deeper into that reading piece in Espanol, right? For that depth and complexity. And I'm talking about dual language world. But when I pulled small group, since they were well on their way and really high in Spanish, and they knew how to infer in Spanish, and they knew author's perspective and all of those fancy things in Spanish, I would pull small group and we would work on their English literacy, because I'm also concerned about them developing their English literacy. So I don't believe that it's either one or the other. I think that we have to develop both. And I understand that Spanish transfers into English, all the literacy, but there are still 11 vowel sounds that haven't been taught. They won't transfer because they don't exist in Spanish. Who's going to teach those 11 vowel sounds? That sounds like an opportunity for small group to me. So I'm also not going to say, oh, well, it should have transferred from Spanish. Sorry about that. Spanish has 5 vowel sounds. A, E, I, O, U. That's all they have. A, E, I, O, U, right? They have, of course, we have our digraphs and our diphthongs and things like that we understand, but their vowel sounds are A, E, I, O, U. That's 5 vowel sounds. When you go into English, we have the short A, the long A, the soft A, right? Short, long, soft. We have the same for, so we have 15. Some people say 16. Who's gonna teach all of the others? Because the Spanish vowel sounds are the soft ones. A, E, I, O, U. But who's gonna teach a, I, O, who's gonna teach that? We expect them to transfer that in and figure that out on their own? No, I'm not. I'm not making that mistake of deferring that to just, what is it? It's like a sense of like, they'll figure it out on their own. No, I'm taking ownership. I am going to teach those things to them, and I'm pulling them into small groups to make sure that they don't have to function like that at the beginning of the year and figure it out for themselves that way. Because some of them will not figure it out for themselves. Some of them are really going to struggle with it. And I don't want my students to struggle with it. I want my students to be successful, period. That's all. Just successful. And so that means I'm going to take ownership of it. And I'm going to teach the other 11 sounds that didn't transfer from Spanish. Okay. So when it comes to levels, let's take a look at some of the writing levels, right? We have, here we have pre-literate. I was actually in CFB when they would teach this way back in the day. Pre-literate, early emergent, emergent, transitional, and fluency. Again, you're seeing similar types of phrasing when it comes to referring to writing language development and the stages of writing development. So you're looking at, when it comes to the stages of reading, emergent, early, transitional, and fluent. And so now we're going to be able to talk a little bit about what takes place in each of these stages. I'm going to break it down into the Fountas and Pinnell, because I love Fountas and Pinnell. They're the Acme standard. So I'm going to stick with the emergent, early, transitional, and fluent, and what that looks like for every grade level or for every stage, because we understand that some of those stages can take place in 7th grade. They can take place in kinder. They can take place in 4th grade. You know, we can't discriminate, and we want to discriminate. But you guys, not all students have the same opportunity as others in terms of reading and literacy development. So some students, I have a lot of friends that had dyslexia growing up and they dropped out. And then even worse, they thought, they were told that they were, you know, the S word in schools. And I'm like, dyslexics are really smart. If anything, by virtue of the fact that we see things differently. It's left-handed too, which is a very common characteristic of dyslexics. And, you know, everybody seems to look at it. All the right-handed world looks at things from one side, and the left-handed people look at the same object from the other side. And that's an advantage, because you're seeing things that other people don't see. And so it really hurts me when dyslexics have been treated like they are not intelligent in school and they end up dropping out. That's right. That's hard for me to hear, because I had 3 or 4 adults hovering around me like, you know, like birds just fluffing around me trying to, and I remember the discussion. I was so young, but I remember like, what's the big deal? Why are they having all these big talks around me? Like, am I broken? What's wrong? And I remember being worried about that. And you guys, not everybody has that opportunity. So we should not be judging students that come in without literacy in 7th grade. We should not be turning our nose at them. We should not be hateful towards them. We should not be ignoring them. We should be empowering them with literacy. What are we doing if we're educators and we are not educating people on literacy? What are we doing? We have an opportunity to teach child literacy. Okay, you're a math teacher. Hey, we've had this conversation with welding teachers, right? High school level welding teacher noticed that some of his students didn't know how to read. In my classes, he learned how to teach students how to read. And he told me, I'm going to create a time of the day where we're going to offer them the ability to learn how to read. And he's like, it's not welding, but they're on my list. They're on my roster. And I'm great. I'm like, that's ownership. And that's awesome. So, This right here can happen at any, my first job in teaching somebody how to read was a woman who was 40 years old. I was 18 years old and she was 40 and she had never gone to school. And she did not get to go to school because both of her parents were disabled. And she had to be at home working with them and taking care of them. And they were in wheelchairs. So she didn't get to go to school. They never had any trace of her ever going to school. And here she was, 40 years old, and she came to my program. She was a housekeeper, and she came to our literacy program, which at the time existed. It was called Literacy Volunteers of America, Dallas. We were out of the Dallas Public Library System. And she came to our program, and when she learned how to read after all of the work teaching her phonics, which wasn't really literacy, I'm sorry, literally, if I had to log the hours, I would say we logged about 20 to 30 hours, right? So once she learned how to read, my life was changed. She was so happy and she was laughing and she was giddy and she was giggling because she could read. She was reading about a second grade level text. She was like, this is everything, but this is all I need to know. I can teach myself from here, you know? And sometimes I wonder where she is now. I was 18. I can't believe that would have been 30 years ago, and that would make her 70. Anyway, phenomenal woman. I can see her face so clearly. And that moment changed my life. So knowing that we can really empower adults, like at that moment, I was like, wow, we're empowering an adult with literacy. Like, what's her life going to be like from here forward? Like, what's that? She was talking about being able to read street signs, you know? And I thought to myself, this is amazing. Like, this is a super. So teaching reading is a wonderful opportunity that changes people's lives. Not everybody has had the same opportunity. I was blessed because I didn't do anything, nothing from my own power, nothing from my own right, nothing that I did to earn it. I was just simply blessed to be surrounded by people who gave a care about what I was going to be doing in my literacy, in my journey. And that's where I come from. And that's the heart that was given to me when I was a child, because that's what was modeled for me by the adults in my surrounding, right? So that is what I'm giving to you, right? It's not happenstance that I'm here caring about literacy. It's not happenstance that I take the time out to teach you guys things that are going to, no, this is, and I'm not doing anything exceptional because it's just passing it forward, because it's what was given to me when I was little or when I was in the classroom, you know? So we're just passing it forward. All right. Let's talk a little bit about literacy that takes place in pre-K and those early stages. There's a lot of things that we can work through, and one of those is going to be like songs and rhyming. So when it comes to songs and rhyming, and even on the TExES exams, because that's like where I source from, is my information on getting teachers to pass their state boards. But there is a particular slide that I use that is referring to, okay, I think it's showing now. And it is rhyming through songs. So a lot of times when you think about like small children, right, and they're going into pre-K, you think about all the songs that they sing, right? Like, oh, MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, right? And on that farm, he had a whatever, with an ooh, ooh here and an ee, ee here and an ooh, ee, whatever. So when they do that, right, they're learning the vowels and they're learning the sounds. E-I-E-I-O, right? When they're little, they don't realize that they're learning the sounds. They're just learning the sounds. They're just singing a song. They're having fun, like, E-I-E-I-O. They're having fun. They're dancing. They're jumping around. They don't realize that they're being taught phonemes, which are sounds of the letters, or just sounds that we end up connecting to graphemes, which are letter symbols. We'll go over that later on. So it starts with the rhyming through songs and through music, right? Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And then we're going to move into phonemic awareness. And when it comes to phonemic awareness, this is now when we are an alphabetic principle. This is now where we are taking the phonemes E-I-E-I-O, and we're showing them like which letters match those sounds. Like, oh, wait a minute, every time I see this symbol, right? It's like, oh, okay, oh, so they start learning that symbols actually make sounds. And so the symbols of these letters, we call them in the field graphemes, which makes perfect sense to me because it's a graph or a drawing of a letter, right? It's a grapheme. And the phoneme is the sound of that letter. So you have grapheme every grapheme has a phoneme. This, like two diagonal lines that meet in the middle, this is an X, right? And this makes which phoneme, right? So they need to know that the grapheme they need to know all the letters, and then they need to know the sounds of the letters. So I'm using both like field language, and then also, because this is going out into the internet, so I want to use like layman's terms too. So the phoneme is the sound of the letter, right? And the grapheme is the drawing of the letter, the symbol of the letter, the graph of the letter. All right, that takes place right around pre-K and K1, that alphabetic principle. So what's alphabetic principle? Alphabetic principle is when they understand that the alphabet is actually a representation of spoken language, and that words are a physical representation of spoken language. So they're like, wait a minute, that right, I'm looking at the word rhyming. The students start learning that, wait a minute, that series of symbols right there actually says a thing. It says a word. Yes, what does it say? Well, that word says rhyming. Oh, that's alphabetic principle, right? They realize that these letters on a page are actual spoken language. And then they learn that what the symbols are, and then what sounds are connected to each symbol. So they learn the sounds of the letters, or in reading language terms, they learn the phonemes connected to the graphemes. We call that phonemic awareness, right? They are aware of the phoneme sounds, right? And then the next level of work is in K1, and we're looking at, okay, now that we know the sounds that each letter has, how do we connect them? So I want to jump in before I even go further into segmenting and blending. I've used these for many years. This is only going to work without a background. So we have these letters. And so what I would have our students do is, well, first of all, I would take an assessment, and I would say, okay, which letter is this? And some of the times the students would know it and sometimes they wouldn't. And that to me is just educational opportunity. It has no negative reflection on the child themselves. or the person themselves. So we had this, what letter is this? And they would typically, honestly, they would know most of the alphabet. The vowels they would almost always know, but they would get mixed up on things like G, what I used to call when I was little, the hard letters, the G, the K, the J, the Q, the X, the R, the W, maybe the Z. So they would, and so what I would do is they would tell me what they knew. I would just point at it. And let's say they said, I'm talking about letter recall. Let's say they said A, B, C, okay, whatever, asterisk, circle, dot, happy face, whatever you want to do, just make it emotionally okay. You might just put a dot, E, M, okay, G, okay, okay. They know half, meaning they know the sound, but they don't know the name of the letter. That's okay. At least that's something. Let's say they had the I now, and they go, oh, okay, half, but they get it confused with the L. Half. Now they're confusing everything with the sound. It looks like, okay, K, oh, right. So they could go through the whole alphabet, and I am making notes. So now I know what the child is able to do. And I can focus on developing the things that the student needs to learn. So this paper is gold to me. So let's say this is Daniel. This goes to Daniel. So I know that this is Daniel's page, and this is exactly what Daniel needs. And so I have a plan now. I'm going to go over the letters that he still needs help with, right? And that's what I'm going to go ahead and focus on. Obviously, I will have finished all of the alphabet. Or if I noticed him going through levels of frustration, I don't want this to be a frustrating experience for him. So I might stop him and say, okay, Daniel, we're just going to stop there for the day. And tomorrow we'll just pick up on the rest of it. You did great. Awesome. I'm so glad. There's really only 3 things that we need to work on so far. And we can knock that out this week. So it's all about too, how do you frame it? Because they are insecure about how they are performing. They know that they're behind. Why should we go behind them and turn around and say things like, make grunts or noises or pretend like we are, too good to have to teach them to read. Anyway, so it's critical that we make ourselves available to them, and that we make this seem attainable for them, right? And so it's okay, Daniel, we're working on it. This week, don't wait, we have 3. That's all we have. We covered 12 letters, and you only have to do 3. Out of this many, you only have to do 2. Out of this many, you only have to do 3. And I think that's pretty good. We can knock that out this week. Okay, so just bear with me, and we're gonna practice it together, and we're gonna pull small groups tomorrow. So I'll probably start calling your name tomorrow to meet with me in the back, and we can work on those 3 things. And I bet you may not even need all week. You could have it done by Wednesday. So anyway, I'm looking forward to it. So that positive willingness and destigmatization of what they're going through. It's bad enough that they have to struggle with this to begin with. We don't need to go on layering trauma on top of compounded trauma. We don't need to do that. That's not our job. So going back to the original screen, we have now our phonemic awareness pieces. So let's say we're talking about how are they? First, we have to identify what letters do they know, what letters do they not know. Once we teach them those, which could be literally through practice, you could be having them, you draw out the H, the M, the J, let's say you have a sheet of paper, and let's say for little Daniel, I'm gonna pretend like we're Daniel again. So based on his results on his assessment, right, I know that I need to work on his H, his I's, and his J's. So I'm going to do H here, right? And I here, okay, and J here. All right. And this probably is much messier than I would really do on line paper, but I don't have the kindergarten line paper with me right now. And I'm using a marker so that you can see it more clearly. Anyway, so I might say, okay, this is the H. And he goes, H. Can you say that? H. H. Okay. But more importantly than the name of the letter is the sound that the letter makes. And this is, real life facts. It's more important that he knows the names of the letter. I'm sorry, the sounds of the letter. Because when you read, you're not going to be reading the names of the letter. You're going to be reading the sounds of the letter. So I said, Daniel, the good news here is that you already know the sound of this letter. So because every letter has two things, it has the name, H, and it has the sound. And I'll put a little ear here, like a little ear. It sounds like, but the name is H. So when you read it, you're not going to say H. Let's say you had the word hat, right? You're not going to say H at. No, you're going to say. So the most important thing about this, Daniel, is the sound of the H, and you've already got that. So yeah, good news for you. Happy face. I am really happy about that. So now you know that this is, whenever you see it written in a word, it makes the sound. Right? Okay, the name is H. Okay, but you already know the sound. Let's take a look at the I. So here we have the I. This is the letter I. Can you say that? I. You say that one more time. I. Okay, good. So every letter also has a small letter. They have the capital version and then the capital and lowercase version. So then you have the I, which is your lowercase, which is a smaller version. And then you have your J. The J makes the sound J, J, J. But the name is J. But the sound is J. Here, the name is I. The sound is I. All right. Of course, this begins a big thought process of how did I pick the long I? How come I didn't go with the short I? How come I didn't use the E, right? Yes, to all of those things. Teaching the vowel sounds is going to be a whole other video, but teaching the vowel sounds in English should be done explicitly. The first thing I would do is, I don't think it's the right time for Daniel right now because he's still learning his ABCs and he's still learning the sounds of the letters. So he's still learning the phonemes. But once he learns the sounds of the letters, and once he's able to say, like, this is the letter A sound, B, B, S, C, S, D, D, once he's able to do that, then I would begin a conversation about the vowel sounds, short, long, soft, all of that. Anyway, so I'm working with Daniel right now based on the H, the I, and the J. The J he already knew made the J sound. He just needed to learn the name of it. The name is J, but you already know it has the J sound, Daniel. So pretty good. That's good. Next day, Daniel and I meet. And we take a look at some of the results of the lesson from the day before. And I say, okay, Daniel, let's take a look again. You know, and it says, okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Yay! Awesome. I, yes. J. You got them. That's exactly right. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, right? When we said we'd stop there, Daniel will pick up on that next week. But that's great. So look, it's Wednesday and you've already learned your letter sounds. So that's the whole first half of the alphabet. I think you're doing great. This is absolutely doable. I bet you we may even be able to assess you on the next half of the alphabet before Friday, and you're going to be half a week early. So it's having that type of conversation, right? So these students need wins, right? Like as humans, we need wins, and we need short, quick, fast wins. So when it comes to students in literacy, I really like to give them big wins early on. And that's going to be one of the best things that we can do to be sure that our students stick with the literacy, is make sure that they can get big wins as quickly as possible. And I mean 24 to 48 hours, they need to be seeing it. And if we can do it immediately, even better. That way we can be sure that they stick with it and they feel like this is accessible for them. All right. So that's just a taste of how you might work on phonemic awareness. And we'll go into a little bit about, so once we've taught them, you know, the letter sounds and they understand that these letters make sounds, then we're going to go into sounding out words, right? So I'm going to need to switch my media and go with a pen instead of and of course we're using a pencil in real life. A pen instead of a computer. I don't think I have any pencils here. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into the document camera. I'm gonna need to get rid of my background again. Okay, so now we are on the segmenting part. And we have, let's say, just go with cat. Okay, so we have, what letters do you see? C, A, T, wonderful. What sounds do they make? And what letter sound does the A make? A. Does it make any other sounds? Ah. Okay, what other sound does it make? Ah. Okay, so, all right, then we have let's go with the ah sound, okay? Then what about this letter, T? What sound does it make? All right. So this is going to be, Daniel says, all right. And if this is the ah sound, can we blend those and make those two letters blend into one sound? Ka, k, ah, k, ah, ka, ka, ka. Ka. Awesome. You did it. High five, right? So ka. Perfect. Now can we add on the T sound, which makes it sound t, right? Cat. Well, you just did it a minute ago, Daniel. Go back to where you were. Cat. Exactly. Okay, so now you're gonna add the T sound to cat. And then Daniel's over here going cat, 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 cat. Okay, say it faster. Cat, cat, cat. That's it. That's it. Cat, cat. Yes, that's it. Woo, you did it. Cat, cat. Ooh, right? 5 happy faces. I'm so happy for you, Daniel. That's awesome. Because yes, this is your first word read. So you're like, bam, you did it. High five. So now you have cat. That's exactly right. And that, and then here's the awesome part. Tomorrow, Daniel, when you come over here, we can take this C and we can swap it out for so many other sounds. Now that you know how to make the at sound, I can put an H in front of it. I can put an M in front of it. I can put a P in front of it, right? I can put a D in front of it. I can put a B in front of it. And so, you know, it's so much fun. So this actually is a lot of fun. I used to make so many different resources. And there's a guy who has and I'll show him to you here in a minute, because he does amazing things with this type of blending and segmenting. So he'll take let's say we have the at, and then tomorrow, this is tomorrow, right? And I'm here with this fictitious student named Daniel. And I say, okay, so this is yesterday at, I said, exactly, that's at, right? So what happens if I put this sound in front of it? What sound does this make? Okay, so if you have the and then you put the at, what word does that make? Mat, mat. Exactly. That is. And what would this be? Perfect. Now, if you blend that together, what do you get? I'm like, okay, softer, say a little softer. Pat, pat. Exactly. You like pat your back or you pat your hand, right? Pat. Okay, perfect. What about the B? Let's do it with the B. Okay. What sound does that make? B, 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 b. Okay, good. B, b, b. And then we're going to add that and blend it in to the at. So what does that give us? B, b, at, but, at. Yeah, but at is not going to work because that is separated. You want to put these together. Okay, because sometimes our students need reinforcement. They forget, they slept the day before, right? So, we've got to be making it one sound because you're separating it. You're saying b, and you're putting this wall here, and then you're saying at. No, we want to get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. We want to put this together. Ba. Yes, exactly. Ba. Beautiful. Exactly. Ba. It becomes now blended. Ba. Bat. Bingo. That's it. That's perfect. Bingo. Woohoo. You did it. Bingo. Bingo. In Spanish and English and every bingo I have. Okay, so bat, right? And so we have to be working with our students to help them on the blending and segmenting because it is. I mean, they will revert to bad habits if we let them revert to bad habits. So we have to correct them immediately, right? When they make those mistakes, and support them in gaining that ability to blend language. So yeah, so much fun. I love teaching reading. So, you know, you'll take, and that could be, again, I just use the word at for bat, hat, mat, pat, whatever. You later on you go it, right? It, hit, lit, sit, mit, you know, ot, cot, dot, hot, you know. So there's so many different combinations, and then there's people that do amazing things with this. There is a guy online, and I will share him with you right now. He has a channel in Spanish. He's from Monterrey, Mexico, and he has a channel that's called El Mundo de Aprendizaje. And I think it's pretty awesome because he does something out of nothing. He makes something out of nothing. It's amazing. Okay, give me 1 second. So I am gonna spotlight El Mundo de Aprendizaje because they're so, they deserve a big shout out. I don't know how many followers they have at this point in time. I guess I could look at his channel. 371,000 subscribers. I think that's great, but he really he deserves more. He really does. So he does this phenomenal work with blending and vowels. And I'm going to share that with you right now. Let me make sure that you can hear it. Some of you will be able to understand it, some of you won't. For those of you that don't understand it, that's okay. Just follow the examples. I'm going to be kind of relating it to you guys.
Hola, ¿qué tal a todos nuestros seguidores de la página El Mundo del Aprendizaje? El día de hoy les traemos un material para trabajar el proceso de la lectoescritura de tu hijo o tu alumno. Es un material en el cual vamos a tratar de trabajar de la imagen a la palabra.
Yeah, so let's see what he's doing here.
Sopa. Muy bien.
Maestro, ¿me puedes deletrear la palabra sopa?
Claro que sí. Leemos sopa, sopa, sopa.
So I think he missed something important, so I'm going to go ahead and go back a little bit.
Sopa.
Sopa.
Tenemos. See what he's doing. I'll explain it to you in a second. I got to figure it out.
Palabras, nuestras imágenes, pues vamos a realizar.
Vamos, maestro.
Y bueno, pues vamos a realizar esta actividad. La maestra Lupita me va a dar la indicación de cuál es la primera imagen que vamos a realizar. Posteriormente yo tengo que encontrar la palabra y la voy deletreando sílaba por sílaba, letra por letra y la escribimos. ¿Va, maestra Lupita?
Listísima.
Venga, ¿cuál imagen, maestra Lupita?
So the child chooses one of these images and then they put the image on the page. And then they write the word out and then they break it into syllables and then they break it into individual phonemic sounds, right? Sounds. And then they, I guess, write the word out at the end. Let's find out.
A ver, vamos a empezar con sopa.
Sopa. Tenemos aquí las imágenes de sopa.
Muy bien.
Aquí y buscamos la palabra sopa. Sopa. La ponemos en nuestro cuadrito.
Okay, so they know, they pick soup and then they pick the word that matches soup.
Y vamos a deletrear sílaba por sílaba.
So then they're going to break it down into syllables. And for me, that's clappable, right? So, pa. In English, of course, it has one syllable, soup. English is a lot harder to read, by the way. It is literally takes like an extra year because it is so unintuitive or non-intuitive. I have to go back and take a look, but it is not intuitive. It is difficult because of the letter combinations and the phonemic combinations that we have. Your silent E's, things like that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get back to it. So they're breaking it down into Now, this is, of course, is an activity for students to do. So they would take, like this word is sopa, right? Which we don't have, just the fact that it's not in English doesn't mean that it's not viable. It is absolutely viable. We have syllables in English, and it is a practice that we can do in English. So besides, we also have invented words that we will use in kinder versus second. I'm not a huge fan of invented words, but they work because they help students break down sounds and things like that. So anyway, sopa has 2 syllables. And so this is assuming that the student already knows, right? Because we have to teach students how to count out and do the syllabic awareness so they can clap out words. Now they're doing that like in pre-K or kinder. They're saying big, car, Jacob, school, teacher, so they're getting several, this is like embedded into everything they do all day long. If I was a kindergarten teacher, I'd be in the hall going, water, bathroom, I would be doing this constantly. So anyway, so the child has syllabic awareness. So this is something the child is doing on their own.
So, pa. Letra por letra. So, pa. Y terminamos escribiendo la maestra Lupita en el renglón.
Bien.
So, pa.
So every sound, sopa. In Spanish, they actually learn how to read more in sílabas, which are syllables. And so because it is so phonetic, they will take it and they will go into or like, anyway, that's kind of a different video, but they will break it down into mame, mi, momu, papa, pipopu. So we'll talk about that later, but they break it down, they learn in syllabus or syllables. Either way, it's still phonetic. They're still sounding out the words. It's still syllabic, and all of that, everything on this page applies to English. So I love the fact that he is very intentional about how students segment words and how they sound them out and how they break them down into syllabication. So this is essentially working on 3 things just on this one paper. We have, well, in the image too, which is, I'm sure, helping a lot with recognition and understanding that words actually have value of real things, right? So you have sopa, they're working on syllabication, pa, they're working on phonemic awareness, and then their word, they write it out, sopa, because at the top, remember the child didn't write it out, the child picked it out of 4. That means they have to, that's rigorous for them at this point in their life. They have to pick a word, moto, pato, mesa, which one of these looks more like sopa, the image, and they actually had to pick it. So that's one level of rigor. I love the fact that they choose, because choice is really critical when it comes to student engagement, even adult engagement. You chose this video, right? Nobody forced you to watch this video. So you chose this video. And there's a lot in terms of you being engaged and you taking ownership and you staying engaged with the video because you find value in it, right? So children are the same way. If they choose it, they're going to like it better. And so it doesn't matter that the teacher only gave them 3 choices. They picked the one they want. That's ownership. And now they're more engaged in the work because they picked it. Anyway, phonemic awareness, and then they wrote it out themselves at the bottom, sopa. I love it.
Muy bien. ¿Qué les
Maestro,
pareció?
¿me puedes deletrear la palabra sopa?
Claro que sí. Leemos sopa, sopa, sopa. S-O-P-A. Sopa.
Excelente, muy bien.
Vamos a borrar y hacemos otra palabra maestra.
Me parece.
Take another one
¿Estás
after
listísimo?
that.
Listo. Lo borré.
A ver, la siguiente palabra va a ser
Now let you watch it
moto.
smoothly.
Moto. Aquí tengo la imagen de moto. Palabra
Bien.
moto. La ponemos en nuestro cuadrito. Sílaba mo. To. M. O. T. O. Mo. To. ¿Cómo ve, maestra Lupita?
Bien. Me parece muy divertida la actividad. ¿Cómo?
That his floor is taped out. I used to do this in my classroom and I'll show you there, but we tape for many different reasons. And he will use them for things like them walking from like one syllable to the other syllable. So maybe every corner of this star might say S-O, like, you know, they might have like a different part of a word. And so they actually spell it, like you'll see it. It's just amazing. He does fabulous stuff with his, I would like to say he makes something from nothing, because if you didn't notice, that is like a piece of cardboard. And then of course here he has a short, and I'm just gonna go and look at some of his things because it's really good. So looking at, I can already tell you, they're working at making different words. So he's adding two of these together to create words.
Muy bien, muy bien. Apaga las capturas si quieres.
He's even using color relation. Oh my goodness. He did the thing. Okay. Wow, great. So he's actually breaking it down by color. So he's helping them recall by actually connecting it to color. So here we have Puma, which he is the blue Pooh and the pink Ma. So yes, I mean, they can identify the letters Pooh, and then they can identify the letters Ma, which is what I was doing at first. But then I noticed that he's using color, and every word has a different set of colors. This is amazing, you guys. This is great. He's so good. This is why he's so good at phonemic awareness and syllables. He's really good about blending.
Comenzamos. Color amarillo, naranja, azul,
Orange. Look at
rojo,
this. Blue,
verde,
red,
naranja, azul,
orange, blue,
amarillo, rojo,
yellow,
verde,
red.
pelota.
Green.
¡Ah! No lo puedes agarrar, ¿eh?
La imagen. Vamos a tomar mesa.
Mesa. Ahí está. Ah, se cayó. Mesa. Vamos a formarla.
I used to do these when I was in the classroom. I will say that. Not as fancy as his. I would use an index, like on a spiral, the little index cards in a spiral, and I would cut them in half. And the first part would be like an M, right, or meh, and the last part would be the rest of the words. So you can cut those little index cards into individual letters, or you can cut them into vowel sounds. Like even in English, you can do OU for ooh, you know. Anyway, like soup, and you'd have an S, an OU, and a P. Anyway, I'm gonna let you see this because this is like foundational learning to be able to get to the index cards thing. This is what we do, and it's so much fun. And so then we have our dry erase boards, because you want the students to be writing out the words and using this little tool that you've made, teacher made, right? For them to learn from.
Aquí está. Vamos a detenerla. Ah, aquí está, maestra Lupita.
Muy bien.
Mesa. Vamos a escribirla. El renglón. Mesa, maestra Lupita.
Excelente.
Pato, la imagen de pato, maestra.
Ok.
Perfecto, buscamos.
Pues vamos a empezar a buscar. Mamá, moto, mapa, mono, lupa, sopa.
Yeah, I can't with it. I can't with it. He did it. That is a cardboard lupa, or I guess like a magnifying glass, but not really. But it's got the clear red overlay. And so the red ink becomes invisible, of course, when he has the red overlay over it, and then it makes the words stand out. This is so, see, you guys, he doesn't have a huge budget for this. I mean, now he does because he has 271,000 viewers. But he should have more. But he started this way. He started with toilet paper rolls, cardboard that he found on the side of the road. I mean, because when you are a good teacher, you can start with nothing. And I hate to say that. I'm not saying that we should be given nothing. I'm just saying that when you know how to teach, you can teach with anything. You can literally teach with almost anything. I'm looking at this little, bottle right here. I can teach images, I can teach marketing, I can teach chemistry, I can teach phonemic awareness, I can teach comprehension. There's so many things I can teach with this. I can teach weight, I can teach size, length. There's so many things that you can teach. And that's not even mentioning the fact that I can still open it up, which we can talk about force and friction there. And then we can squeeze, which we're talking about pressure there. We have a cream, right? Which we can talk about texture. We can talk about liquids, solids, and gas. There's so many things that you can hit just from teaching, and you can use anything to teach just about anything. Let's go on because he is full of surprises today. He's rocking and rolling today.
Pato, maestro, aquí está Pato.
Excelente, vamos a sopa. Tenemos aquí las imágenes de sopa.
Muy
La ponemos
bien.
aquí y buscamos la palabra sopa, sopa. La ponemos en nuestro cuadrito y vamos a deletrear sílaba por sílaba. Es so, pa. Letra por letra, so, pa. Y terminamos escribiendo la maestra Lupita en el renglón.
Bien.
So, pa. Muy bien. Lata.
Bien, profe.
Muy bien. Pelota. Venga.
Excelente.
Okay, so the teacher, she's acting as the teacher. The teacher picks an image and the child jumps to the word. So she's at the duck, right? Which in Spanish is pato. So the child is going to have to jump to pato.
Pato.
Muy bien, profe.
Moto.
La imagen. Vamos a tomar mesa.
Mesa. Ah, se cayó.
There are just
Mesa.
so many ways that are fascinating to teach students how to blend and to segment. And El Mundo de Aprendizaje is a fabulous channel for teaching all of those, like so many different methods that are creative ways to get the students the type of results that they need to get fluency, right? Okay, so we're just breaking that down, right? We have blending and segmenting, sounding out words, right? You have to be aware of your syllables. You have to know your sounds. You have to know the names of the letters. And if there was something I could say, names of the letters is less important to me than the sounds of the letters. So you need the sounds of the letters for sure. And that is alphabetic principle, right? And phonemic awareness. And then there's more to it. When we go into English, there's a whole other onslaught of pieces, which are going to be our digraphs and our diphthongs, which you can hit at another time. I'm going to annotate that. So, but yeah, so blending and segmenting is so much fun. All right. So from that, I'm going to go back to that TExES reference, which is going to be on my ESL slides that I made in my little fancy slide. And we're looking at, right, we talked about phonemic awareness, and now we're talking about syllables and then decoding. And I guess from now, I guess we are already here, because he was working on the syllables and decoding, which, we can do obviously an English table, and then our cat. I think the next piece is once they know how to decode, Then what level of work do we have? Well, after that, we're looking at things like fluency. So fluency is important because students are reading smoothly. So like once they're able to read certain letters smoothly, then and small words smoothly, and we're working on that fluency piece. And again, looking at reading the A to Z, and I'll go ahead and I'll pull that up because I do want to share resources with you along the way. And I really, one of these days, I need to purchase the reading A to Z subscription. I just haven't done it yet. So again, a 1-year subscription is $135. That is not bad when it comes to like the amount. You can build an entire year out on the information that you get off this website. You don't even need to you don't need to have other curriculum. It's good to have other supports. Like it's good to have a whole library of real books that students can get in their hands, right? But I literally taught 1 year at a school where I was given absolutely nothing, and my students still did very well. And it's because I used reading A to Z to provide all of the books. I just had to print them out, and I had printing access, thank goodness. So I printed them out and I would staple their little books. And so every child had a handheld book. So I've taught an entire year from reading A to Z, just working on the fluency and getting them on grade level, which, you know, my students would end up on grade level or above grade level, right? But it's because I believe so, not because, you know, oh, whatever. No, it's because all they need is the opportunity. They need somebody to sit down with them and spend time with them. So I'm going to show you their decodable books. And the books are really good for identifying resources that would meet the children's needs, right? So you see these are decodable books. So that means they're decode to means that they're sounding out and they're reading. So these are these are books that focus on their reading skills. And so if you notice, they talk about consonant blends, trigraphs, long vowel patterns. You can actually pull out books based on what you're teaching. So let's say that I'm working on short vowels, because my English learners struggle a lot with short vowels since they don't exist in Spanish, right? So did it fit? So I'm going to click on this. And then you even have projectable books. Okay, so I want a double-sided book. And well, I need to get that subscription. Anyway, so in theory, you would be able to go in and you would look at that decodable book based on what your needs are. You can project the book or you can pull it up in PDF. Let me pull one up. I know I have some. I don't, I'll have to edit this out, but it's okay. So let's say I'm working, because typically I did work with upper grades, meaning second, third, fourth, fifth. I spent many years in fifth. So just to be sure we're looking at the same thing, I'm going to reshare. So you can pick books based on what you are teaching. So for example, I'm hitting like US history. This is a level U book for fifth grade, right? And it even tells you the word count. And I'm also hitting a historical event. This is front and back of the book, right? And so you print this whole thing out and you staple it and they have a book. You know, we teach things like table of content, and, you know, you can teach things like graphs, how to read a graph, what's a caption, what's a subtitle, you know, what is a key, what's a legend. You can talk maps. So there's so many things that you can hit. And then of course they have the vocabulary bolded: settlers, hatred, what an ugly word, entrepreneurs. Right, and then you look at the glossary: wealthy, devastating, transcontinental economy. So you have like all of these different words that are written here. And so in fluency, you are identifying where they are. So let's say this child is in instructional level U, and you're helping support them. But that's one of the things, you know, that's awesome about Reading A to Z, is they have books written at all levels. And they have this, because I like to spend my time in social studies and history. I do love history. And so I do like fiction. I do like it, but I love history. And so my students, you know, admittedly probably got more history than they did fiction. But the fiction that I sometimes would teach would be historical fiction, because I still felt like they were learning history at the same time that they were learning how to read. So a lot of time in school, we as teachers are struggling for minutes. And so they'd say you have 45 minutes for social studies and you have like an hour and a half or whatever for reading. So I would just take my reading class and I would make it longer, extra long, and I would embed social studies reading text like this, so that I would hit social studies and reading at the same time. And I may even have them write a story based on what they read in this book. So they're hitting writing too, right? But the secret sauce is just pulling them out in small group and giving the students what they need and making sure that they're understanding and reading with them so they can work on their fluency. We said we would talk about fluency, so let me model a couple of things to you. So fluency is when they're reading smoothly, right? And so they can be reading smoothly and not be making any sense. And this is what we call, back in the day, I don't know if they still call it that, but this is what we used to call jackrabbit reading. And it's when they're just going really fast. And we say that they're reading with automaticity is the real word, but jackrabbit reading is what we would say in layman's terms. And so jackrabbit reading or automaticity sounds like this, right? On the morning of January 25th, 1848, James Marshall went to expect the citizens to forever through the new sawmill. His crew was building in California. The ditch that ran out of the mill to make water fall more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, he spotted some Chinese, so he cut several pieces and showed his crew. They said a piece that was gold. Right? So that is going to be, it's automatic, right? We can't say it's not fluent because that person knows how to read and they read pretty fast. But then if you ask me, what did you read? The child typically says, I don't know. I don't know, some guy named James. Well, there's nobody named James. Anyway, so it's not effective. Automaticity is not where you want to be. We want to be at prosody, and prosody, prosody, prosody is when they're reading smoothly, but they're reading with this correct pausation, with the correct intonation, with the correct observation of the grammar. So I'm going to reread this and I'm going to read it with prosody. Okay. Keeping a secret. On the morning of January 24th, 1848, James Marshall went to inspect the ditch that carried water from the American River through the new sawmill his crew was building in California. The crew had deepened the section of the ditch that ran out of the mill to make the water flow more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, he spotted something shiny. Marshall collected several pieces and showed his crew. They tested the pieces. It was gold. So we typically would teach the students to pause 1 second after the comma and 2 seconds after the period. But the whole point is for them to read through it, take their time, read it with the spirit and the intent of the author, and then be able to recall what happened. We want them to comprehend. If they're not comprehending, then why are we reading, right? So we want them to comprehend what they're reading. And you can ask several questions, just even about this. You can always go with the basic who, what, when, where, why. Who did it? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? That's what anybody can do without a reading background. You could always ask who, what, when, where, why. Teachers that come in and we're teaching for passing the state test, I mean, that always has to be in the backdrop of our mind. We want our students to be lifelong learners, but we also have a set of criteria that our students have to master, not just know. So I actually created something to, because there are many years, you guys, that I was given a classroom and not given curriculum. And to be fair, curriculum is the state TExES, the state essential knowledge and skills. And then the books that you're given in your classrooms are typically just supplements. The curriculum everyone has. So I'm just gonna show some of this because I am writing a book on this piece, but I will show you some of the pieces. So if I had a narrative, a fiction narrative text, right? This is like more, the state asked for much more than just who, what, when, where, why, right? So the state asked for things like the setting, right? When and where did it happen? Who are the characters, right? What is the cause, any causes and effects? And so we could actually go through the Gold Rush book and identify the causes and then the effects. The cause, well, there was talk that there was gold in California. The effects, people moved to California and then some people found gold, right? Conflicts, there was struggle. Maybe they were fighting with each other and there was competition. Maybe life in California was very difficult and they had to live in unhospitable situations, right? So what we would do is, what I would do is I would hit some of these really what we call higher order thinking skills. We would hit these higher order thinking skills with every single text that we read. And so I'd say, okay, like this is for a fiction book. For every, like a child would fill out one of these for every book that they read. And I have a nonfiction model. And this is just the fiction model. So they would go through and it's like a little booklet and they would fill them out and they would absolutely love it because they get to pick what they liked from the book and how they were going to show it. And so some of those, see if I can find it. This should be it. You know, we spiral the same reading choices to the students over and over again, and they end up mastering this information pretty easily. And so, you know, this is, I just showed it for one of I had a teacher meeting and they absolutely loved the work that the students did. One of the reasons that we have visualization in there, and this is the Spanish version that you're seeing, but one of the reasons we had because I want the students to visualize the text. They would have to draw out some portion of the text that maybe didn't have a picture out already, but they felt like could have had its own illustration and they would illustrate it. And then they also had to generate a caption for the part they illustrated and then, you know, label who these people are. they had to do their sequence of events, they had to do text evidence and inferences, right? And so the students would come in and they'd even pick like author's perspective. Was it first person or third person? And so, yeah, it's full of really rich information. So when you're teaching to hit criteria for the state assessments of knowledge and skills, you can't just stop at who, what, when, where, why. You have to go a whole lot deeper into analyzing the problems, analyzing the solutions, analyzing the causes of the problems, analyzing how the characters were transformed, or maybe even how, if you're looking at historical items, like how did this affect some sort of unforeseen outcome, right? That was pending in the future, right? Foreshadowing is another piece that we look at. So when you're looking at reading, once we're doing our reading and our syllable and our decoding, then you're looking into fluency. How can you develop fluency? Repetition. I have recently produced a vocabulary piece with a slide in it that was really helpful. So let me share that with you too. Second here. So when we're looking at fluency, notice that the first item that's pointed out is reread a passage several times. And so they have to reread the passage several times over and over again until they read it more quickly. And then they move on to another passage over and over again. So what I would have them do is I would have students sit down with me and let's say they would read let's say they would read that Gold Rush piece. And I'm going to show you kind of how fluency will develop. So let's pretend that it's the first, section. And you don't want it, again, reading levels. You don't want it to be too hard for them. This would have to be like at their instructional level, meaning that 80% of the time they get the words right, 20% of the time they're developing their reading. So looking at the first paragraph, it might say something like, on the morning of January, the child might say, on the morning of January 24th, 1848, James Marshall went to inspect the ditch that carried water from the American River through the new sawmill his crew was building in California. The crew had deepened the section of the ditch that ran out of the mill to make the water flow more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, he spotted something shiny. Marshall collected several pieces and showed his crew. They tested the pieces, it was gold. So most of that was read correctly, right? And we're only working now on 3 words, which is really just 2 words. One of them is Marshall and the other one is sawmill. And so, so this is something I would say, okay, we're going to work on her pronunciation of Marshall, and we're going to work on her pronunciation of sawmill. And it's going to be, think about it, Marshall. Well, this man's name is Marshall. Like Marshall. You see how you could be Marshall? Yeah, I see. Okay. What about sawmill? Sawmill, not sawmill. Sawmill. It's a compound word. That means 2 words that are put together. Sawmill. Compound word. Sawmill. Okay, sawmill. Yes. Okay. So that's the first time she read it. The second time she reads it is going to be better. On the morning of January 24th, 1848, James Marshall went to inspect the ditch that carried water from the American River through the new sawmill his crew was building in California. The crew had deepened the section of the ditch that ran out of the mill to make the water flow more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, he spotted something shiny. Marshall collected several pieces and showed his crew. They tested the pieces. It was gold. Great. Fabulous. You read that very well. Much better than the time before. Let's read it one more time. This time, try to read it more smoothly. On the morning of keeping a secret. On the morning of January 24th, 1848, James Marshall went to inspect the ditch that carried the water from the American River through the new sawmill his crew was building in California. The crew had deepened the section of the ditch that ran out of the mill to make the water flow more quickly. At the end of the ditch, about 6 inches under the water, he spotted something shiny. Marshall collected several pieces and showed his crew. They tested the pieces. It was gold. Bravo. Listen to you. You did so much better. Look, 5 minutes. In not even 5 minutes, you are learning how to read from the instructional level to now at the independent level almost on this text, right? So I want you to go home and I want you to practice just this paragraph. Read it to yourself 3 or 4 times. Remember, Marshall, not the other way, Marshall. And remember, sawmill, 2 words put together, sawmill, sawmill. So be sure that when you go home, you practice, that you remember that this is Marshall and sawmill. And tomorrow I'm going to call you up to come back to the table with me. And I want to hear how much you've grown and how smoothly you can read this text. Okay, so you're going to read it. You read it with me 3 or 4 times. And when you go home, I want you to read it at least 3 times, 3 to 5 times. It's always better to read it out loud. That way you can hear yourself and you can actually become more fluent because you read it out loud. So you can read it to somebody, but even if like somebody's working and there's nobody at home and you find yourself at home or everyone's busy, go into your room and you can read it out loud to yourself 3 to 5 times. And tomorrow, I can't wait to hear about how much you've improved on your reading. And so it's that simple. So you're just working on their reading with them and you're giving them the opportunity through several rereads to gain fluency on a passage. And you can do the whole thing, that same thing that I did with that little paragraph can be done with a whole book. It can be done with pages of a book. It can be done with a sentence. So that again is at the discretion of the teacher. But sometimes I've been known to do it with a word. Like, okay, work on this word. Let's sound out the word if it's a big word, right? Or even if it's a small word with a struggling reader, right? It's about doing what's right for the student, given the level of performance at the time. So with that, we have looked at several things today. Let's go back to our slide that drives everything, right? And it helps us organize these pieces. We've talked about rhyming through songs, right? E-I-E-I-O. The first thing that the students do is they learn the sounds, right? And they learn it through songs and learn it through rhymes. I remember learning my short and sound, my different short vowel, short, soft, and long vowel sounds through a song in kinder. And there was one that was, it's terrible. We would never sing it today, but we did back then and it worked. One of them was the aging ape is out, and we would dance. And we'd say the aging ape is out of shape because he ate and ate and ate. And that's how we remember the A sound. And then we had the armadillo's armor is, oh, you had to cover yourself. The armadillo's armor is all that you can see. The rest of him is down inside a very safe place to be. So it's like armadillo's armor. And then we had the antelope went by so fast, he lost his hat when he went past. So it's just, you know, and I don't know, I guess they made these songs up, but it worked. I'm 48 now and I'm still recalling these songs smoothly. So rhyming through songs, right? A, ah, ah. And we had them for all the alphabets, but I don't remember all the other ones. I just remember the A. Anyway, that's how you're gonna go through when they're little bitty, right? That's why we have the nursery songs that we have. BINGO, things like that. And then we move into phonemic awareness. We're grounding it now into the awareness of the letter structure and the letter sounds, the graphemes and the phonemes. And we want them to have alphabetic principle. When they see these graphemes, that's actually spoken language. And then how do you teach now phonemic awareness? You make sure that they know the value or the sound of every letter, and then they begin to blend the letters, right? They begin to put them together to sound out words. So you have like b, ah, bah. So that is all happening. That blending, segmentation, syllabication is happening in this phonemic awareness piece. And then we're moving into fluency and comprehension when we look at that reading and the decoding syllabication. I'm sorry, we're looking at all of that fluency. And then we're going into comprehension. The comprehension, as you saw, can be extremely complex. And it can be really, really like layered. And so I'm a big fan of understanding baseline things like who, what, when, where, why in the text, but I'm also pushing for that empowerment piece when they read. I want them to know the tone of the literature. I want them to identify the voice of the author. Is this a first person? Is this a third person, right? Is this an autobiography, which is very different than if it's written by a biography written by somebody else. So I want them to be able to analyze all of those features of the elements of stories and text. And so I go much deeper through what I call my reading review. In Spanish, it's all exists to El Repaso de Lectura. If you're interested in getting your hands on the Repaso de Lectura, because we have it for poemas, right? So we analyze poems. We have it in English and Spanish. We have it for fiction text, and then we have it for nonfiction text. In addition to that, we have sentence stems that are based on the state assessment for reading. And they can be used and they can be differentiated. I actually have like a base level, which would be like a tier 1 level. Everybody can do it together. And then I have a more advanced level that I have like the junior level, and then actually I don't call it junior anymore. I call it alpha. And then the beta is going to be the level that is a little bit higher than the alpha. And so, yes, we have different levels of the of the reading review, or el repaso de lectura. But it's there because we want to hit all those higher order thinking skills and the text that we need. So one day we'll come back in and we'll talk about writing and the stages of writing, but this has been a long piece. And so I'm excited because we got it out. We still haven't talked about running records, and we haven't talked about reading evaluations yet. So those need to be done still. But I think this is a very good start. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you soon in my next video as we tackle literacy and what it looks like for our students that come in at all grade levels, right? They don't have to be reading at on level. They are reading the best that they can with the preparation that they've been given so far and the opportunities that they've had so far. They are bringing us the best they've got, and that's themselves. Their parents are giving us the best that they've got every day. They're sending to school the very best that they have. And so we need to just pick them up where they are and get them where they need to be. That's our job as educators. Get them where they are to where they need to be. Period. And just understand that not everybody had the same opportunities that we had.